Hello and welcome to the original document series, episode 4, 1936, when the Communists joined the Democratic Party. And this is about when the American Communist Party merged into the American Democratic Party in 1936. So we're going to go through a lot of original documents to kind of document what happened there. And to briefly recap from the prior episode, episode 3, that was about how in Europe the idea of left and right was very common. They presented everything as a spectrum of left to right around the state, where communism was the left, fascism was the right, centered around the state. But in America, we would look at it differently. We would look at it as individualism versus the state. Okay? And so individualism would be like Americanism. And in Europe, the state is sort of all powerful and the individual is irrelevant. And so whether you had a dictator in Hitler or Mussolini or Stalin, it didn't matter. The state was all important and the individual was irrelevant. Okay, so that will come up in this episode also. We'll be doing a lot of looking at European history. So that concept will pop up. All right, so let's go take a look at what's going on here. This is going to center around the 1936 United States presidential election. This article is from Wikipedia. It's not an original source, but it's a brief overview. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the primary topics here. So the Democratic candidate was Franklin Roosevelt, of course, running against Republican Alf Landon. All right, he's also running against communist and other candidates, as always. And if we go look back at some other topics here, we're going to be talking about the Spanish Civil War. All right. And that, of course, was from 1936 to 1939 between the Republicans, and what they call the Republicans were actually socialists and communists, and the nationalists. Okay, so that was a bloody civil war, and that's going to be very prominent. And then the NRA, not the National Rifle Association, but the National Recovery Administration, and that was what FDR pushed in 1933, but the U.S. Supreme Court struck it down as unconstitutional, an unconstitutional overreach. Okay, so that's going to become prominent. And we're going to talk about Earl Browder, a communist leader, a Communist Party USA. Okay, so if we take a look where we're starting at, let's go back to Spain, 1931, where a lot of this begins. And so I'm going to take a quick scan of the 1932 Students' Goods Atlas. So let's take a look at that. So that is Spain from the 1932 Goods Atlas. And so what happened in 1931, where all this started out? Well, in 1931, the socialists won elections in Spain. So the socialists and the communists won. This is the New York Times from Monday, June 29th, 1931. So as you can see right here, the New Spanish Cortes, basically socialists under the leadership of Finance Minister Indalcio Prieto, and the Radical Republicans, again, these are the communists and the radical socialists, basically dominated that election. Okay, so Spain had an election, and the socialists pretty much won that election, and the what's called the Republicans in Spain took over. Here's another newspaper story from that time, from the Marxist Daily Worker, and the Daily Worker is a Soviet mouthpiece. It's a Soviet communist mouthpiece. So if we look from that period in time, okay, so this is the Daily Worker, organ of the Communist Party USA, June 30th, 1931. And if we go into here and we say, well, what happened? Spain election intensifies crisis. Report communists get 4 seats in 1 district. Socialists in lead. Basque and Catalonia demand independence. Okay, so incomplete election results returns in Spain from the capitalist news agencies show a sharpening of the revolutionary crisis. On June 28, voting took place throughout the country for deputies to the Spanish Cortes, the Constitutional National Assembly, which will frame a constitution and become a parliamentary body. Okay, no party won a majority. So basically, the what's happening here is the socialists and the communists are winning the election and becoming the loyalists. We'll call them loyalists after this. Okay. And let's see, if we go back to 1936, jump forward. All right. So if we come to, this is the Arcadia Daily Tribune from April 1st, 1936. Worldwide news flashes. Let me come down into that. NRA, again, this is the National Recovery Administration, officially abandoned. The NRA, President Roosevelt's most ambitious recovery experiment, passed into official oblivion today. Quietly and without ceremony, the once powerful agency, which in its heyday affected the life of virtually every individual in the United States, ceased its final perfunctory operations at midnight. So that organization basically died in July 14th, and these are things that happened in 1936. In July 14th, 1936, let's see, the AFL meets American Federation of Labor. All right, and the Spanish Army was going to quell riots. So again, these are the loyalists, these are the socialist communists. Spain's army of 100,000 was concentrated in barracks throughout the nation today, ready to support 40,000 civil guards to quell feared civil warfare between rightists and leftists. Again, that's a common European term. The conflict between radicals and conservatives, laden with dynamite since the leftists triumphed at the polls amid rioting and bloodshed, was brought to the boiling point by the murder of Jose Calvo Sotelo, powerful monarchist rightist leader. His body, hacked by hatchets, was found yesterday in the waiting room of a cemetery. So this is turning into a bloody war between the two factions of socialists, the leftist socialists and the rightist socialists. And of course in France, there's a lot of near revolution in France, where the Reds, i.e. the communists, are trying to control things. And of course they call them pinks, communist-supported pink coalition and so forth. So that's going on at that time. The June 26, 1936 Arcadia Daily. And again, the presidential election is going on right now. Roosevelt is not being nominated that night. But prior to that, this person, Detroit, June 26, accusing President Roosevelt of building a communist's nest. Reverend E. Coughlin, the radio priest, today joined Representative William Lemke of North Dakota in predicting the election of Lemke to the presidency on the third-party ticket. Both the priest and congressman foresaw victory in November and indicated that the priest's economic theories would be the ABC of the Lemke administration. So Reverend Coughlin was sort of the Rush Limbaugh of 1936. All right, so he's accusing them of being a communist nest. Well, that's not completely without merit. If we look to, again, some documents from that time period. There's a book, The Forgotten Man. Okay, this is a book by Amity Shales, and in it we document these folks who in 1927 went on a delegation to the Soviet Union, trade delegation. So these people were in the New Deal. These were architects of the New Deal, and they went in 1927 to visit with Soviet leaders Stalin and Trotsky before Trotsky was booted out. Okay, so let's see here. So there was a lot of pressure on FDR at the time, a lot of pushback. And at the same time, you have, of course, August 1st, 1936, Hitler officially opens up the Olympics in Germany. Okay, and this is the, what is this? The Arcadia Tribune, August 1st, 1936. All right. And September 4th, 1936, in the Daily Times. Okay, Spanish forces and death grips. Again, this is about the Spanish Civil War. The Loyalists, and again, that would be the Socialists and the Communists. They're basically using airplanes to bomb the rebels, and again, the rebels would be backed by the Mussolinis and the Hitlers and so forth, the fascists, socialists. Okay, so the Loyalists are bragging they had 20 airplanes, greater than the rebel Air Force. Okay, and America's building bombers at that time. All right. So let's see, and in the Daily Worker of June 29th, 1936, so after FDR gets the nomination for the Democratic Party, we have the Daily Worker, who on June 29th, 1936, let's see what happens here when this loads up. Obviously, a lot of momentous history happening right now. And what happens on June 29th, 1936? Earl Browder and Ford nominated as communist standard bearers. So this is the Daily Worker. Earl Browder is the candidate for president. James Ford is the vice president. Okay, so these guys are now the Communist Party nominee for president. All right. And if we take a look real quickly at this, you get to see again, this is Soviet propaganda, communist propaganda. All right. Basically a lot of communist propaganda. And I'm just going to zoom down here. So we get a lot of youth of the Soviet Union, and let's see, what else do we have here? So a lot of integration with the unions. So the Communist Party had a lot of integration with the labor unions. They have a special section on labor union activity. Let's see. All right. And Spanish farmers on the march. So the Communist Soviet forces were very interested in the Spanish Civil War. So they would have this in practically every episode of the Daily Worker, the communist newspaper, an update on what's going on in Spain. They're very concerned about that because they had a socialist communist government, actually called it a Bolshevik government at one point here. Okay, so let's see. In July 18th of that year, 1936, all right, this is the Arcadia Daily Tribune for July 18th, 1936. Hitler launches new U.S. policy. Berlin, July 18th. Chancellor Hitler has secretly launched a move to clear the way for improved political and commercial relations with the United States, it was learned today. So Hitler is trying to use diplomacy to get closer to the United States. It's kind of hopeless though at the that time because all those folks were in like Flynn with the Soviets. Okay. So also on August 19th, 1936, things were getting kind of violent in Spain. All right. So this is the Arcadia Daily Tribune, August 19th, 1936. War on Moors features battle, Madrid. Foreign unofficial intervention in Spain pushed ahead at accelerated speed today, with more aircraft and war supplies arriving daily. Okay, while the desperate Madrid government determined on a campaign of ruthlessness against Spain's ancient enemy, the Moors. Poison gas, it was openly announced over the Madrid radio, will be used against the 10,000 Moors who have been brought into Spain from Africa in foreign planes to fight with the rebels. Only tear gas will be employed against the other insurrectos. Well, that must be how they're trying to cover for it. So what they're admitting here in this story is that foreign countries, and of course that would be the Soviet Union and America, are sending the socialist communist forces, the loyalists of Spain, aircraft and weapons, and apparently poison gas that they're then using. And they're trying to tell the populace, oh no, we're only using it against the Moors that are being flown in, and you hate the Moors. Okay, so there's a lot being brought to bear in this Spanish Civil War. August 28th, 1936. President gets facts in tour of Dust Bowl. So there's a massive drought that hits the Midwest. Okay, and of course, President Roosevelt comes in and he's going to help people out. He's going to say, let me give you some money. Okay, that's actually going to ultimately help his election. But on the same day, rebels may never reach gates of nation's capital. Okay, so we've got more fighting in the Civil War. Okay. And let's see. So a lot more in this war. Okay. So there's the loyalist defenders at Madrid. So there's a lot of American support of the socialist communist government in Spain. Okay. Let's see. So we've got the August 29th, 1936 Daily Times. The great game. This is the Daily Times of Rochester, Pennsylvania. Okay. The great game of politics. A defensible argument can be made to justify the New Deal spending. It is also possible to put up a defense for practically every administration policy, even those invalidated by the Supreme Court. They may not be sound arguments or an impregnable defense, but at least they will be plausible, and when flavored with such colorful Roosevelt phrases as a rendezvous with destiny and ideals of justice, are immensely attractive to those who like pretty pictures and resent factual analysis. The thing is the waste and confusion. From the start, these have been the principal indictments against the New Deal. They exist to such an extent that if administration policies had all been sound and direction right, they would have defeated the New Deal purpose. In the beginning, the president tried to do something about it. So basically, there's a lot of complaints about the waste and the graft and the corruption of the New Deal programs. So Roosevelt's under a lot of pressure because his New Deal has failed to bring America out of the Great Depression. Fortunately for FDR, there was that drought. Okay. And of course, we have Madrid shelled by rebel flyers. All right. So there, again, the Civil War is prominent. The Spanish Civil War. And if we go to the left column, priests will read letter in churches on Germany Sunday. Roman Catholic priests all over Germany will read from pulpits tomorrow a pastoral letter asserting that Europe will be in serious danger if the Spanish government survives rebellion against it, and incidentally intimating that support of the church would aid the German Nazis in their fight against Bolshevism. In the letter, it is disclosed that Catholic churches sent a memorandum to Adolf Hitler recently complaining of treatment meted to the church. The pastoral letter was drafted at a recent conference of bishops at Fulda. If Spain should now succumb to Bolshevism, Europe's fate could not be sealed, but it would be dangerously jeopardized, the letter read. The task which would face our nation in such an eventuality is obvious. May our Führer, Hitler, with God's help, succeed in solving this staggering problem unflinchingly, aided by the faithful cooperation of all Germans. So Germany is supporting the rebels in Spain, and they actually both German National Socialists and Bolsheviks are basically destructive of the church and suppress church people, and there are complaints about both of them. But that kind of shows the forces. You have the National Socialists in Germany sending planes and weapons to the rebels. You have the Soviet Union and America sending planes and weapons to the loyalists. All right, so it's a big fight going on over there. Very, very important internationally, being watched closely. Okay, so if we go to, I want to step back to someone named James Casey. Okay, so if we take a look at, let's see, this is the here we have the New Standard Encyclopedia Yearbook for 1936. Okay, if we go down, there is an entry in here, and it talks about how on August 28th, James Casey, managing editor of the Communist Daily Worker, resigned from his post and from the party in protest against tactics of the party's political bureau, which he declared was attempting to swing the support of its membership and affiliated mass organizations to President Roosevelt. The move, if authentic, was in line with communist world strategy as formulated at the 1935 Comintern Congress. The Soviet government, according to observers, feared Landon's election might result in withdrawal of recognition and adoption of policies adverse to Soviet interests. The Trotskyite wing in the United States, angered by the willingness to cooperate with bourgeois elements, became more vocal in its opposition to the Stalinist faction. So Stalin and Trotsky had a falling out, and Trotsky had to flee the Soviet Union lest he be assassinated or executed. And so Trotsky was a prominent communist leader. And if we go take a look at the February 21st, 1935 Daily Worker, we can see that person, James Casey. Okay. See one of his writings here. All right, so on the, again, this is the Daily Worker, the central organ of the Communist Party USA. There's James Casey. Okay, so he's talking about some relations between Stalin and Hitler, okay, and Hearst. So there was a lot of accusations of William Randolph Hearst being associated with Hitler. All right, but James Casey is a writer and editor there. That's documented. All right, so if we go to New York Times, and this is August 29, 1936. Daily Worker editor resigns, scores party. James Casey denounces tactics of leaders as hypocritical, says they seek to elect Roosevelt. So even though they've got a nominee for president, Browder, they really don't care. They really just want to elect Roosevelt. So it's all a sham, and he's outing it. And so that's what he's saying here. And as a result, the Communist Party is disavowing Casey. Okay, and next day, the Communist Party expels Casey. Okay, and disavow him. And let's see, so Now, that's not unusual for the communists to work with newspaper editors. In the Berkeley Daily News of August 31st, Berkeley Daily Gazette of August 31st, 1936, there is in Berkeley, California, a union leader and an editor of a communist paper named in confession. 5 people were paid $10 each in a murder. A George Wallace, a seaman, confessed before the Alameda County grand jury, according to Earl Warren, future Supreme Court Justice, County District Attorney, that he and 4 other persons conspired in the murder of George Alberts, engineer on the steamer Point Lobos last April. The killers were paid $10 for the job. Wallace's confession was that Earl King, Secretary of Marine Engineers Union, employed Ben Wimpy Satchowitz and myself to murder Alberts on March 21, a Saturday. Wallace was arrested near Brownsville, Texas, and returned here. Others, named by Warren as conspiring to murder Alberts, were A.M. Murphy, assistant to King, and F.H. Ramsey, a seaman, and Ben Sakovitz. Sakovitz, named by Wallace as the killer, is reported in hiding in New York. Other reports indicate he has fled to Mexico. Alberts was killed last April when he was slashed with a knife in his cabin on the steamer Point Lobos. Authorities said he was slain because he had interfered with plans of radical labor leaders. Union officials, however, charged the arrests were made in an attempt to discredit the union and denied there was any plot against Alberts. Publisher named. Warren said, immediately following Wallace's reported confession, that Wallace had named Lawrence Ross, editor and publisher of the Western Worker, a communist daily, as one of those involved in the killing. Wallace said Warren reported that Ross had made plans to send him, Wallace, to Russia so that he would not face the danger of extradition if named in connection with the slaying. Warren immediately ordered that Ross be placed under arrest. We went to the Point Lobos but were frightened away by a policeman on the dock there, Wallace is quoted saying. The next day, Sunday, we returned with 3 sailors. Wallace said he could not identify them. We had been promised $10 for the killing. Satchowitz and 1 sailor stood guard near Albert's cabin. Another sailor and myself took up a vantage point nearby. Alberts came down a companionway and went to his cabin. Wimpy Satchowitz and the sailor went in after him. I could hear Alberts gasp. And so they murdered this one engineer, sailor, for resisting the Union, which was basically working with the Communist Party and Soviet Union. So it's not unusual that these newspapers are tightly interwoven with Soviet plots and goals. Okay, so what happens after the election? Well, the communists lose the status as party. So the day after, Thursday, November 5th, 1936, New York Times, the Communist Party, all of the votes were shifted through the daily workers' actions through Stalin's command to shift the support to Roosevelt, such that the Communist Party lost its status as a party. Okay? So that's Earl Browder, of course, lost, but that was part of the plan of Stalin. And the Communist Party basically ceased to exist. It was, it went into the Democratic Party. Okay? And the right after that, December 29th, 1936, flurry in Britain over U.S. arms aid. And this is the New York Times. So basically, British Foreign Office is freaking out over yesterday's announcement by the State Department that government licenses had been granted for the export of airplanes and engines to Spain. So, upon winning that election, America started sending more airplanes and weapons to Spain. Okay. So now this is not unusual. Stalin did a lot of plots. There was a fellow named Krivitsky who, if we look at J. Edgar Hoover, had a letter to the FBI in 1944. And there was a person named Walter Krivitsky who basically fled to the United States. But he said he was an executive with the Soviet military intelligence for Western Europe from 1936 to 1937. And J. Edgar Hoover wanted to find out more about him. So this letter is an exhortation to find out more. Okay. When he fled the Soviet Union and he came to America, he wrote a book called In Stalin's Secret Service. This is a book review, November 26, 1939, New York Times. And basically, he wrote a book about his time there before he fled in Stalin's Secret Service. And one thing he wrote that they mention in this is part 2 of that article, the review, book review in the New York Times. Stalin was of the opinion that he could create in Spain a regime controlled by Moscow. With Spain in his pocket, he could command a genuine and durable alliance with France and the British Empire. Stalin believed it possible to create in Spain a regime controlled by himself. That done, he could command the respect of France and England, win from them the offer of real alliance, and so forth. So that's why Stalin basically interfered in Spain. And he also interfered in the United States, and he wanted to get FDR reelected. Okay. Well, of course, in 1941, General Krivitsky, that person, was found dead, shot. This is February 11th, 1941, in Washington, D.C. Okay. So, of course, he was probably assassinated. And we'll do a quick fun flashback. This is a Mussolini cartoon from March 9th, 1936, while Mussolini was invading Ethiopia. Benito Mussolini was once jailed for 5 months because he opposed an Italian invasion of Africa. Strange as it seems, he once protested the invasion of Africa, and it's because he was a socialist leader. Okay? Well, he was still a socialist leader. So that's interesting. All right, so that's basically it. That documents the shift of the American Democratic Party from being sort of an independent political party to becoming a wing, effectively, of the American Democratic Party, and why it was done. Stalin basically wanted FDR to be reelected at all costs. So that's it. All right, thanks for watching. Remember to like, share, and comment.